He thought the lighthouse was just an inheritance. But when his husky Balto started howling at the sea, the waves answered back with voices of the dead. What they discovered that night will make you believe that love never disappears, it only echoes. The wind off the northern sea carried the sharp scent of salt and iron, curling through the gnarled pines that clung to the cliffs of Havenreach. The old lighthouse, once called Last Light Rose, at the edge of the world like a forgotten sentinel, its lantern glass shattered long ago, its stones bleached by storms and time. The waves below broke in endless fury against the rocks, a rhythm as old as grief itself. From the narrow dirt road came the low hum of an aging truck, its headlights cutting through the gray mist that hung heavy over the coast. Behind the wheel sat Elias Crane, a man of 42 who carried silence like a second skin. His face was worn but strong, his dark hair streaked with silver, his jaw unshaven. The sea had taken his family 3 years ago, his wife and daughter swallowed by the storm that wrecked the fishing trawler, Selena's Grace. He had tried to outrun the memory moving inland, then to the mountains, then back again to the sea, as though the circle might close and give him peace. It never did. Beside him in the passenger seat, head raised and ears alert, sat a husky with fur the color of ice and ash. The dog's name was Balto, and his pale blue eyes glimmered in the dim light like the reflection of a winter moon. Elias had found him a year earlier, trapped in a wire snare deep in the snowdrifts near an abandoned logging road. The husky had been half-starved, bleeding from the leg, but even then there was a defiance in his gaze, an intelligence that refused surrender. Since that night, they had been bound in a wordless covenant, the broken man and the rescued creature, keeping each other alive through the long, cold months that followed. Balto was more than a companion. He was the only witness to Elias's struggle to keep breathing in a world that no longer seemed to want him. Now as the truck rattled toward the cliffs, Balto's ears pricked. He emitted a low, uncertain whine. Elias glanced down. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. Balto's gaze shifted toward the fog-cloaked horizon, where the sea met the sky in a dull line of pewter. The dog's instincts were rarely wrong. Elias slowed the truck as the road ended at a rusted iron gate. A wooden sign hung crookedly from one chain, the carved letters barely visible beneath the moss. Last Light, property of Jeremy Crane. Elias stared at the name for a long time. His uncle, a man he'd met only twice as a child. The family called him a recluse, a dreamer obsessed with machines that could sing. When the letter arrived last week, sealed in thick brown paper with a county lawyer's stamp, Elias had expected it to be about taxes or debts. Instead, it contained a single copper token engraved with the shape of a wolf and a set of coordinates leading here to the old lighthouse. Now he sat before it, the gate groaning in the wind, Balto shifting restlessly beside him. The sound of approaching tires broke the stillness. A dark sedan came crawling out of the fog, and from it stepped a tall woman in a long brown coat. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned neatly beneath her hat, and her face, though stern, carried a tired kind of compassion. "Mr. Crane?" she asked, her voice clear over the moan of the wind. Elias nodded. "I'm Clara Mercer," she said, "executor of Jeremy Crane's estate. I appreciate you coming all this way." She opened her briefcase and handed him a weathered envelope sealed with wax. Inside lay an old brass key shaped like a star, and a single note written in his uncle's careful script. "The sea remembers those who listen. Guard what you find beneath the light." Elias frowned. "He left me this place?" Clara nodded. "The deed, yes. And what's inside it? Your uncle believed it was more than a lighthouse. He called it a house of memory." Balto gave a low bark, sharp and quick, as though answering something only he could hear. His hackles lifted slightly, but not from fear, something else. Something instinctive, ancient. "The foundation is unstable," Clara went on. "Half the structure collapsed after the last storm, but he insisted you'd understand what he built. He said you were the only one who could hear what he couldn't finish." "I'm an engineer, not a mystic," Elias said dryly. "Perhaps," Clara replied, "but you've known loss. Sometimes that's what it takes to listen." The words lingered like fog in the air. Elias pocketed the key, then pushed the gate open. The hinges screamed in protest. and the smell of rust and seaweed filled his lungs. Balto trotted ahead, tail low but steady, his paws making almost no sound on the damp gravel. The path wound up toward the lighthouse. Gulls wheeled above, their cries echoing against the cliffs. The building itself loomed taller with each step, its lantern tower rising crooked, the railing twisted by storms. The front door was heavy oak, scarred by salt, and locked with an ancient iron latch. Elias fitted the star-shaped key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as though the mechanism had been oiled yesterday. The door creaked inward, releasing a gust of air thick with mildew and old oil. They stepped inside. The main chamber was circular, its walls lined with brass pipes and gears half buried in dust. A spiral staircase climbed toward the lantern room above, while another narrow stairway spiraled downward into darkness. Everything smelled of sea brine and forgotten machinery. Elias set down his pack and struck a match. The flame flickered weakly, revealing words carved into the wall. The sea remembers. The light records. Balto padded forward, his nose twitching. The husky stopped before a metal hatch set into the floor and began to scratch lightly at it, ears pointed. "What is it, boy?" Balto scratched again, then barked once, sharp and insistent. The hatch was marked with the same wolf sigil that had been engraved on the copper token. Elias knelt, running his hand over the corroded surface. A faint vibration hummed beneath his palm, as if something inside still breathed. Clara, standing near the door, watched quietly. Jeremy mentioned a lower chamber. He said the heart of his invention was down there. Invention? Elias frowned. She hesitated. He believed sound could hold memory, the resonance of a moment, the last breath, the echo of a loved one. He built a device to preserve it. Elias stared at her, then at the hatch. You mean some kind of recorder? Clara's expression softened. He called it the sea's ear. The name sent a shiver up Elias's spine. Balto pressed his nose against the seam of the hatch and whimpered softly. Elias rose and searched the room until he found a lever near the base of the stairs. When he pulled it, a grinding sound rumbled through the floor. The hatch groaned open, exhaling a gust of cold air that smelled faintly of salt and metal. A narrow stairway descended into darkness. Balto moved first, unafraid, his claws tapping on the stone steps. Elias followed, lantern in hand, his pulse echoing in his ears. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became, until even the sea above was a distant heartbeat. The staircase ended in a vast underground chamber, the walls covered in bronze panels and mirrored glass. Pipes ran like veins across the ceiling, connecting to a massive circular mechanism in the center, half organ, half machine. Strands of copper wire draped from it like roots. Elias lifted the lantern. The light caught a plaque bolted to the machine's base. The Echo Engine, Jeremy Crane, 1928. His breath caught. Balto sat before it, ears erect, his gaze fixed on the center panel where a small handprint had been engraved. Elias hesitated, then reached out. The moment his palm met the cold metal, a tremor ran through the floor. The machine came alive, gears spinning, pipes groaning as air surged through them. The lantern flickered. The air vibrated with a low, mournful hum, rising into chords that were neither mechanical nor human. Then, faintly like a whisper through fog, came a voice. Elias! He froze. It was a woman's voice, gentle, familiar. Don't let the light die. His wife's words, spoken years ago on the night before the storm. The lantern's flame guttered, shadows shivering across the bronze. Balto whined softly, pressing against Elias's leg. The voice faded, leaving only the rhythmic hum of the machine. Elias stood motionless, heart pounding, the ghost of the sound still clinging to the air. This can't be, he whispered. It's not possible. Clara's voice drifted from the stairs above. Your uncle believed memory never disappears. It only waits to be heard. Elias looked down at Balto. The husky's blue eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, fixed on the Echo Engine, as though he too heard something beyond mortal ears. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. The first drops of rain began to strike the tower windows. The sea roared louder, as if answering the machine's call. Elias lifted his gaze toward the dark stairwell. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. But in the depths of the lighthouse, beneath the groan of the storm, the machine continued to breathe, soft, pulsing, alive. And somewhere between the waves and the wind, the dead began to whisper again. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as though the sea itself had not slept. The storm had passed, leaving a low mist that clung to the cliffs like breath on glass. The lighthouse stood silent against the pale sky, its tower blackened by rain, its great lantern broken, but still reflecting the faintest glimmer of morning light. Elias Crane woke in the keeper's quarters, where he'd fallen asleep in a chair beside the old stove. His dreams had been a blur of salt water and half-heard voices. Each time he closed his eyes, he heard her again. Lydia's laughter carried on the tide, her voice calling his name. But when he opened his eyes, there was only the hollow moan of wind through rusted shutters. Balto lay at the doorway, his head resting on his paws, eyes half open. He had not slept either. Every so often, the husky lifted his muzzle toward the floor, ears twitching, as if listening to something beneath the stone. Elias followed his gaze, his stomach nodding. The echo engine. It hadn't stopped humming. Even through the night, a low resonance pulsed faintly through the walls, like the heartbeat of some buried leviathan. Elias rubbed his eyes, stood, and grabbed the brass key that hung from a nail by the door. His instincts as an engineer told him to understand it, to know what made it tick, to see the mechanism. But his heart, still raw and uncertain, whispered that some things weren't meant to be explained. Balto trotted behind him as he descended the narrow spiral staircase. The air grew colder with each step, tinged with metal and brine. The lantern's flame quivered against the damp walls, painting their faces in flickering amber. When they reached the chamber below, Elias froze. The machine was awake again. The great bronze mechanism rotated slowly, the copper filaments humming in steady rhythm. Thin shafts of light moved across the mirrored panels, tracing patterns that almost resembled constellations. The hum wasn't mechanical, it was musical, not random notes, but a kind of mournful harmony. Balto padded closer, tail low, ears pricked forward. He sniffed at the base of the machine and gave a short bark. Elias followed, running his fingers along the side panel until he found something he hadn't noticed before. A small indentation shaped like a paw. He stared at it, incredulous. That can't be right. Before he could stop him, Balto lifted one paw and placed it squarely in the hollow. A deep vibration surged through the floor. The lights within the chamber brightened, and the machine began to spin faster. The pipes above groaned as if the sea itself had entered them. Elias stumbled back, shielding his eyes as the room filled with shifting light and sound. Then came the voices. At first it was only echoes, the overlapping murmur of countless tones. But then one rose clearer than the rest, a man's voice strong and steady, resonating with something deeper. Elias Crane, if you're hearing this, the sea has already chosen you. The voice wasn't Lydia's. It was Jeremy Crane, his uncle. The sound of him filled the chamber, not like a recording, but as though he were standing just behind the light, breathing through the machine itself. I built this place to hold the echoes of those the sea took, the voice continued. Every sound, every last breath, every memory carried by the tide. The waves remember everything, Elias, but it must never be used for profit. To listen is sacred. To sell it is blasphemy. The light flared brighter. Balto growled softly, not in fear but warning. The hum rose into a sharp, trembling tone, and then the machine went still. The lights dimmed, the air settling once more into its cool stillness. Elias dropped to his knees, breath shaking. His hands trembled as he touched the metal panel. It was warm beneath his fingertips, almost alive. I don't understand, he whispered. Why me? Balto nosed at his sleeve gently, eyes soft, as if to answer the question for him, because he still remembered. For a long moment, Elias sat there, listening to the faint hiss of the sea through the vents above. He could almost hear the cries of gulls, the crack of rigging on distant masts. The sounds wove together into something like melody sad, but peaceful. He reached for his uncle's journal, which he'd found the night before on a rusted shelf near the hatch. The cover was leather, warped with salt, the edges stitched by hand. On the first page was written a single line: "Sound is the last ghost we all leave behind." Ilias turned the pages carefully. Diagrams filled the margin, sketches of sound waves, schematics of pipes and bell chambers, notes on frequency and resonance, but woven between them were passages that felt more like prayer than engineering. The heart remembers in rhythm. The bell tolls not for the dead, but for those who still listen. He looked down at Balto. The dog tilted his head, one ear up, the other drooping slightly, his blue eyes steady on Elias's. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Elias said quietly. "You heard him." Balto wagged his tail once softly and let out a low, answering whine. Elias closed the journal. "Then maybe we're not crazy." They spent the day exploring the rest of the lighthouse. Dusty corridors and empty rooms echoed with the drip of condensation. In what had once been the map room, Elias found an old phonograph and stacks of wax cylinders labeled with names: Mariner's Archive Vol I9. He brushed off one and set it on the turntable. The cylinder spun, crackling faintly. Then a thin voice, fragile and trembling, filled the room. "To my wife Eleanor. Should the waves take me, may this voice find you. The sea is kind tonight. I will be home before dawn." Elias shut it off, his chest tightening. Balto pressed against his leg again, as though reminding him that the living still needed his attention. By evening, the mist had thickened. Elias stood at the tower's highest point, staring out over the gray expanse of water. He held Lydia's locket in his hand, the one they'd found among the wreckage. Inside was a photo of her and their daughter Hazel, both smiling against the very sea that had claimed them. He wanted to believe that the voices meant something, that his uncle had found a way to capture what death tried to steal. But a darker thought gnawed at him. What if opening those echoes invited more than memory? What if it called something else? A distant rumble answered him. Not thunder, but the low, grinding growl of an approaching vehicle. Ilias looked down from the tower and saw headlights winding up the coastal road. The engine noise was too smooth, too polished for a fisherman's truck. Balto's ears went up. He growled once, sharp and wary. When the car stopped before the gate, two figures stepped out. One man in a navy suit, tall and broad. The other a woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Even from a distance, Elias could feel the weight of money and confidence they carried. He sighed. I suppose word travels fast. By the time they reached the door, he was waiting for them, Balto sitting at his side like a silent guardian. Mr. Crane, the man said smoothly, extending his hand. Nolan Voss, director of Sonorous Corporation, and this is my associate, Dana Crow. We've heard quite a bit about your uncle's remarkable invention. Elias didn't take his hand. It's not for sale. Nolan smiled, unbothered. Everything's for sale if it can change the world. Balto's low growl reverberated through the room like a warning bell. The man hesitated, glancing down at the husky's glacial eyes. Beautiful animal, he murmured. Loyal, I imagine. More than most men, Elias said. The woman, Dana, adjusted her coat, her tone cool. We're not here to buy, not yet. We're here to understand. Your uncle's designs could transform how we preserve memory. He wanted to bring solace to those who grieve. Don't you think that should be shared with the world? Elias folded his arms. The world destroys what it doesn't understand. Nolan's smile thinned. Then help it understand, or someone else will. The exchange hung like a fog between them. Then Nolan turned, his polished shoes echoing against the stone. We'll be in touch, Mr. Crane. I hope you'll reconsider. Machines like that don't stay secret for long. They left as quietly as they'd come, their taillights swallowed by the mist. Elias stood motionless for a long time, the echo of their words drifting through the hall. Balto pressed against his leg again, head low, growling softly toward the door as though he could still smell their arrogance on the air. I know, Elias whispered. They'll be back. He knelt beside his companion, running a hand through the husky's thick fur. Looks like the world's found us again, boy. But if this place has a purpose, if what Jeremy built is more than madness, then we'll guard it together. Outside, the foghorn moaned over the water, and somewhere beneath the cliffs, the echo engine began to hum again, low, powerful, as if listening for the next soul brave enough to hear. And in that vast silence, Balto lifted his head and howled, not a cry of fear, but of defiance. His voice carried through the mist like a call to the lost, a promise to the sea itself. The light of dawn broke faintly through the gray, and for the first time since Lydia's death, Elias Crane allowed himself to believe that perhaps the sea could remember, and that not all voices were gone forever. The sea was restless that week, its surface dark as pewter, and its moods shifting with every tide. Even when the wind was calm, the water churned as though something beneath it stirred. Elias Crane had learned to read storms before they came, the way the gulls vanished, the hush that fell over the trees, the scent of ozone rising from the cliffs. But this one felt different. It wasn't just weather, it was warning. Balto sensed it first. The husky paced the lighthouse stairs at dusk, fur bristling, nose twitching toward the sea. When Elias opened the door, the air rushed in thick and heavy, carrying a distant rumble. The horizon had turned the color of bruised steel. "Storm season's early," Elias muttered, watching the sky tighten. Balto gave a low, uneasy whine. Below in the town of Havenreach, lights flickered on in windows along the shore. Fishermen pulled their boats inland, shouting warnings across the docks. Word spread that a deep-water squall was forming faster than any had seen in years. The Coast Guard sent broadcasts across the channels, urging vessels to return before nightfall. Elias climbed the lighthouse tower, Balto trotting close behind. At the top, the wind hit them like a living thing. Waves smashed against the rocks far below, spraying salt into the air. The great lantern above them was still shattered, its glass teeth catching the gray light. He rested his hands on the cold railing, looking out over the endless, black line of the sea. For weeks since the visit from Nolan Voss and his associate Dana Crow, Elias had lived with a knot in his chest. Sonaris Corporation had sent letters thinly veiled offers, followed by warnings. They promised funding to restore the lighthouse, to make the archive accessible to the public. But their contracts hid the truth. Ownership would shift to them, and the Echo engine would become a spectacle, a machine of profit rather than remembrance. Elias had ignored every message, until that morning. A courier arrived at the gate, delivering an envelope embossed with the Sonaris insignia, a spiral of light. Inside was a single sheet. Final notice of acquisition proposal. Signatory non-compliance may result in immediate legal seizure under Preservation Act 94A. Elias crumpled the letter in his fist, anger burning through the fog of grief that had long clouded him. "They think they can take what they don't understand," he murmured. Balto growled softly, as if agreeing. The radio crackled suddenly, its static punctuated by a desperate voice. "This is Captain Weller of the Marlin Rose. Engines down visibility, 0 requesting bearings to Havenreach. We've lost the main light." Elias froze. The Marlin Rose was a local trawler. Its crewmen he'd known in passing, the same men who'd helped him rebuild his roof last winter. The storm had reached them sooner than anyone expected. He rushed down the spiral stairs, Balto close at his heels. In the chamber below, the Echo engine stood silent, bronze plates glinting in the lantern light. Its dormant hum vibrated faintly, as if aware of what was coming. Elias hesitated. The last time he activated it, the machine had spoken with his wife's voice. He wasn't sure if it was miracle or madness, but right now, it might be the only way to reach the sea. He pressed his hand to the sensor. The machine answered with a deep, shuddering groan. Pipes along the walls came alive, releasing gusts of cold air that carried strange harmonies through the room. The chamber filled with sound, part wind, part song. Balto stepped forward, his paws on the copper floor, eyes bright. He threw back his head and howled. The note rose, pure and haunting, merging with the resonance of the machine. The air seemed to vibrate in response. The howl became frequency, and the frequency became signal amplified through the pipes, up the tower, and out into the storm. The Echo engine had turned the lighthouse into a living instrument. Far out at sea where the Marlin Rose fought to stay afloat, the crew heard it first as a tremor, a distant wail carried by wind and thunder. Then it grew clearer, rhythmic, steady, pulsing like a heartbeat through the storm. "Do you hear that?" a deckhand shouted. "It's the old bell pattern." The captain yelled back, disbelief cracking through fear. The one Jeremy Crane built into the light grid. Follow the sound. Back at the lighthouse, Elias struck the ancient bell with the iron mallet that hung beside the stairwell. The tones rolled down the cliffs, echoing across the waves in the same sequence Ambrose Hale had once recorded generations ago, a call to guide ships home. Balto howled again, harmonizing with the bell. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the tower in a burst of silver light. The sound from the machine swelled, bending the wind itself into rhythm. Minutes felt like hours. Elias kept striking the bell until his arms burned. Balto's voice never wavered, unwavering as the tide. Then the radio sputtered again. "Land sighted. Lighthouse signal received. We're turning in." Elias exhaled shakily. "You did it, boy. You guided them home." When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The Marlin Rose limped into harbor with a broken mast, but an unbroken crew. Word spread quickly how the sound of the old lighthouse had pierced the fog, how the bell in a husky's howl had saved them. Fishermen spoke of it in reverent tones. The people of Haven Reach began to call it the night the sea listened back. But not everyone celebrated. By evening, new headlines began to circulate online. Echo device misused by local recluse. Unregulated sonic experiment endangers maritime traffic. Company spokesman calls for government oversight. Sonaris had acted fast, twisting heroism into scandal. They claimed the lighthouse broadcast illegal frequencies, interfering with communication channels. They warned that the technology, if left in unqualified hands, could cause psychological harm. Ilias read the reports by lamplight, his jaw tightening. Balto sat at his feet, head raised, ears twitching to the hum beneath the floorboards. The echo engine was quiet now, its lights dimmed, but its presence filled the air. A knock echoed against the door. Elias opened it to find Clara Mercer, her coat soaked from rain. She carried a folder of papers, her expression grim. "They filed injunctions," she said. "Sonaris wants to classify the echo engine as a restricted artifact. They'll use the storm as evidence to prove you can't control it." "So they'll steal it in the name of safety," Elias said bitterly, "unless you claim guardianship." He frowned. "Legally. Spiritually," she said. "Jeremy left more than blueprints. He left a covenant, an oath that the keeper must protect what the sea remembers. If you take it, the archive becomes a sanctuary, protected under heritage law. But it means you can never profit from it. You'll be responsible for every life it touches." Elias stared at her. "You mean I'd have to stay here, forever?" "Yes." The word hung between them, final and heavy. Balto padded forward, pressing his head against Elias's leg, the way he did whenever the man's doubt grew too loud. The husky's eyes reflected the lantern's light steady, trusting, alive. Elias knelt beside him, gripping the fur around his neck. "You think I should do it, don't you?" Balto gave a low, soft whine, tail sweeping once against the floor. "Yeah," Elias said quietly. "I thought so." That night the lighthouse was still, except for the whisper of wind. Elias descended once more into the chamber and stood before the echo engine. The brass panels reflected his face in fragmented pieces, like memories rearranged. He placed both hands on the sensor. "I accept," he said. "I'll keep the light alive." The machine pulsed once, faintly. A low tone rippled through the air, a sound like approval, like the sea exhaling. Balto howled softly beside him, the sound rising into harmony. But far away in a city of glass towers and neon light, Nolan Voss stared at his monitor. On the screen, satellite feeds showed the faint heat signature of the lighthouse and the rhythmic pulses of sound emanating from it. He smiled thinly. "Let him think he's safe," he told Dana Crow. "Sooner or later, everyone sells their ghosts." The storm outside had ended, but another, more dangerous one had already begun. In the silence that followed, Elias looked out across the moonlit sea. The horizon shimmered faintly, as if the water itself remembered the voices that had once crossed it. He felt Balto's head rest against his hand, warm and steady. "You were right, boy," he whispered. "The sea listens." And deep below, unseen in the foundations of the lighthouse, the echo engine stirred once more, its lights flickering like heartbeat beneath stone, waiting for what would come next. Spring crept slowly back to Havenreach, carrying with it the scent of thawed pine and salt. The storms that had once battered the cliffs were fewer now, their fury softened by the calm persistence of the sea. The last lighthouse, once abandoned and scarred by decay, stood alive again, its windows clear, its walls repaired by the hands of those it had guided. 6 months had passed since the night Elias and Balto had sounded the bell to save the Marlin Rose. In that time, the world had changed around them. The fishermen no longer called the lighthouse cursed. Children no longer dared each other to run up to its gates and knock. They came now to listen to the hum of the pipes, to the quiet strength of the man and his husky who had turned sorrow into sanctuary. The echo engine no longer belonged to one man. It belonged to everyone who carried the weight of loss. Clara Mercer had drawn up the charter for the Havenreach Trust, a legal covenant ensuring that the lighthouse could never be sold or claimed for profit. Its stewardship would remain forever with the people of the coast, and Elias would serve as warden of the light. He accepted the role quietly, with the humility of a man who no longer sought to own anything, only to protect what mattered. Each week, families came from across the coast. Some brought relics, old letters, a cracked seashell, a photograph faded by time. Others brought nothing but their silence and pain. Elias would welcome them in the great circular chamber, where the light filtered through the sea-glass windows and painted the stone floor in blues and greens. Balto always waited there, lying beside the echo engine, his blue eyes watching every movement, sensing every tremor of emotion. They called these gatherings the Circles of Remembrance. An elderly woman named Ruth Calder came first, clutching an old concertina once played by her husband, a sailor lost 40 years ago. When she placed her hand on the panel, the machine stirred, and from the pipes rose the faint strains of a sea shanty. Slow and soft, the melody incomplete. Balto lifted his head, ears twitching, and gave a low, resonant howl that blended perfectly with the music, filling the missing notes. Ruth wept openly, her shoulders shaking with gratitude. A week later, a young boy named Theo Marsh arrived with his mother. He hadn't spoken since his father drowned the previous winter. When Elias guided the boy's small hand to the sensor, the machine did not sing, it breathed. The sound was of waves and laughter, of footsteps across wet sand. The boy's lips parted, and for the first time in months he whispered, "Dad?" Balto patted to him and pressed his forehead to the child's chest, anchoring him to the moment, to life. Elias began to understand what Jeremy had truly built. The machine did not summon ghosts. It reminded the living that love leaves resonance. Every memory, every heartbeat, every word spoken in kindness became vibration in the air, never lost, only waiting to be heard again. But peace never comes without a final test. One evening while Elias and Clara reviewed documents by lamplight, Balto growled low, a rumble deep and primal. The hairs along his spine rose. Outside, an unfamiliar sound broke the calm, the crunch of tires on gravel. Elias looked toward the window. Headlights sliced through the fog, stopping at the gate. A black SUV idled there. 2 figures stepped out. He knew them instantly, Nolan Voss and Dana Crow. They had returned, not with contracts this time, but with conviction. The door swung open under the force of their knock. Nolan entered first, his suit immaculate, his expression carved from smug confidence. Dana followed carrying a briefcase. "You've made quite a spectacle, Mr. Crane," Nolan said, his voice smooth as oil. "Your little show of miracles has gone viral. Do you have any idea what you're sitting on? You could revolutionize the world of memorial technology, holograms, voice restoration, sensory resonance. It's the future. But you're wasting it on folktales and fishermen." Elias stood firm, arms crossed. "This place is not for spectacle." Nolan's smile faltered. "Everything is spectacle, given the right audience." Balto stepped forward, placing himself between the man and the machine. His eyes glowed with reflected lamplight, and the growl that came from his throat was not loud, but steady and sure, a warning drawn from something older than mankind. Dana set the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside lay a small explosive device, a charge no larger than a fist. "We don't need your consent anymore," she said coldly. The patent rights already belong to Sonaris. The archive will be ours. Elias lunged forward, but Nolan's bodyguard stepped from the shadows, blocking his path. In the confusion, Balto darted. He was faster than sound muscle and instinct and courage. His jaws clamped down on the intruder's arm, dragging him backward. The gun went off, a deafening crack that echoed through the chamber. The bullet ricocheted off the metal wall, sparking against the echo engine. "Balto!" Elias shouted. The husky didn't stop. He lunged again, tearing the detonator from Dana's hand just as the device armed itself. The timer flashed, read 10 seconds. Without hesitation, Balto snatched the explosive in his teeth and bounded down the lower stairwell toward the cliffs. "Balto, no!" Elias's voice broke as he ran after him, his boots slipping on the wet stone. He reached the open door at the base of the lighthouse just in time to see the husky leap into the darkness beyond. The device clutched tight, vanishing into the roar of the surf. A moment later, the explosion tore through the night. The sound was swallowed by the sea, but the flash lit the cliffs like daylight. Then silence, deep suffocating silence. Elias fell to his knees, the salt spray mingling with his tears. Clara's hand found his shoulder, but her words couldn't reach him. He felt only the ache of loss, the kind he'd sworn he would never endure again. By dawn, the fire was out, and the invaders were gone, driven off by the townsfolk who had rushed to defend the keep. The echo engine had survived, its brass plates scorched but intact. Yet the tower felt emptier than ever before. For 3 days, Elias refused to leave the cliff's edge. He sat by the railing, staring at the waves, waiting for a flash of silver fur to emerge from the foam. None came. On the 4th morning, as the mist began to lift, he heard it, a distant sound carried on the wind. A howl. Not a ghostly echo, but real alive. Elias ran down the rocks, slipping and stumbling until he reached the narrow strip of shore below. And there, limping but standing, soaked and shivering, was Balto. His fur was streaked with soot, his right paw bleeding, but his eyes, those fierce glacier blue eyes, shone with life. Elias fell to his knees, pulling the dog into his arms. "You stubborn, impossible miracle," he whispered, voice breaking. "You brought back the light again." From that day on, the lighthouse bell rang not just for the dead, but for the living who chose to protect love at any cost. The villagers helped rebuild the damaged chamber, and beneath its newly polished floor, Elias placed a small plaque. For Balto, whose courage taught the sea to remember. As the years passed, the Haven Reach Trust grew into a sanctuary for grief and hope. The circles continued. The machines still sang. And every evening, when the bell tolled at sunset, Balto would sit by Elias's side, head lifted, howling softly with the rhythm of the waves. Elias often said that the last light did not call the lost, back it called the living forward. And in that sound, in that faithful howl that echoed across the cliffs, the people of Haven Reach found proof of what Jeremy Crane had written long ago. The sea remembers those who listen. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep the light of hope shining. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that love always finds its way home.